The sirens were already fading when the body was found. It lay half-hidden beneath a collapsed section of fencing behind the old freight depot, where rusted rails disappeared into weeds and darkness pooled like oil. Dawn hadn't fully broken yet, and the blue and red reflections still flickered across puddles on the cracked concrete. Someone had tried to run. The scuff marks told that story clearly. Whoever it was had lost the race. By the time detectives arrived, the scene was sealed, photographed, bagged, and reduced to evidence markers. Another crime in a city that had learned how to look away. Another life about to be summarized in reports and court transcripts. But this one would not end the way anyone expected. The victim was identified before noon. Mid-30s. No criminal record. A warehouse supervisor who'd worked late and never made it home. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, delivered with something heavy, something ordinary enough to vanish into the background of a city full of objects that could kill. The pressure was immediate. Headlines demanded answers. Politicians demanded arrests. The department demanded results. And someone, somewhere, would pay. They always did. 2 blocks away, Marcus Hale was already being watched. He didn't know it yet. He was just another man on a bus, staring out a scratched window, replaying an argument from the night before. He worked maintenance at a nearby plant. Long shifts, low pay, a life built on routines, so dull they felt safe. Marcus had been near the depot that night. That was the first problem. The second problem was that someone remembered seeing him there. A witness came forward by evening. Said they'd seen a man matching Marcus's description arguing with the victim near the tracks. The description was vague, but confidence filled in the gaps. It usually did. People wanted to be helpful. They wanted to matter. By nightfall, Marcus's name was on a list. By morning, it was at the top. Detective Alan Brewer had worked homicides for 15 years. He'd learned that cases didn't get solved, they got closed. The difference mattered, but not to the people signing his performance reviews. Brewer studied the file in silence. The witness statement, the timeline, the grainy security footage from a warehouse camera that showed a blurry figure moving near the depot around the estimated time of death. It could have been anyone, or no one, but the shape was there, and once a shape existed, imagination did the rest. Marcus Hale was brought in for questioning before lunch. He wasn't arrested at first. That came later. For now, he was just helping with the investigation. He sat under fluorescent lights, hands folded, answering the same questions again and again. Where were you? Who were you with? Why were you there? Marcus told the truth. He'd taken a shortcut home. He did it sometimes. He'd never seen the victim before. He'd heard nothing. Seen nothing, done nothing. The detectives listened politely. Then they stopped listening. Hours passed. The room grew smaller. The questions sharpened. Inconsistencies were suggested, then stated as fact. A detail Marcus didn't remember was framed as a lie. A pause became guilt. Fatigue did the rest. By the time he was allowed to leave, Marcus felt hollowed out. He didn't know that his words had already been rearranged on paper. He didn't know that the witness had been shown his photo more than once. He didn't know that the video footage had been slowed, zoomed, enhanced until the blur looked just enough like him to convince people who wanted to be convinced. 2 days later, he was arrested for murder. The trial moved fast. Too fast. The prosecutor painted a clean story. A chance encounter. An argument. A blow delivered in anger. No weapon found, but motive didn't need one. The witness testified with certainty. The video played on a loop, the shadowy figure walking toward the depot, never away from it. Marcus's public defender did what she could. She questioned the witness's vantage point, the quality of the footage, the lack of physical evidence tying Marcus to the scene. But doubt is fragile. Fear is louder. After 9 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty. Marcus didn't react at first. He waited for someone to say it was a mistake, that the real trial was about to begin, that the truth still mattered. Instead, the judge read the sentence. 25 years to life. Just like that, Marcus Hale stopped being a man and became an inmate number. Prison doesn't announce what it takes from you. It removes things quietly. Years passed. Appeals were filed and denied. Witnesses moved on. Detectives retired. The city forgot the depot, then tore down. A shopping complex rose where the rails once rusted. Marcus aged inside concrete walls, marking time by meal trays and lockdowns. He watched men lose hope, then lose themselves. He learned how to survive by becoming smaller, quieter, less visible. But he never stopped saying the same thing. I didn't do it. Most people stopped listening. Outside, a different story was forming. It began with a box in a records room, mislabeled and untouched. Inside were old evidence logs, handwritten notes, and a property receipt that didn't match the official file. A rookie clerk noticed the discrepancy while digitizing archives. It was minor, easy to ignore. But she didn't. The receipt listed an item never mentioned at trial. A metal tool recovered near the scene, logged late, then transferred without explanation. No DNA testing had been recorded. No follow-up noted. Just a signature. Detective Brewer's signature. The clerk flagged it. An internal review was requested. Quietly. Very quietly. Because if that item had been tested, and if it didn't match Marcus Hale, then the entire case began to crack. And cracks, once seen, spread. Brewer was contacted for clarification. He claimed he didn't remember. It had been years. Thousands of cases. Mistakes happened. But paperwork has a way of remembering for you. As the review expanded, other questions surfaced. The witness had changed their statement twice before trial. The video enhancement process had been undocumented. Notes from the interrogation room were incomplete. None of it proved Marcus innocent. But none of it felt clean. A request was filed to test the recovered tool using modern forensic methods. The lab results came back sealed, stamped, and delivered in a thin envelope that carried more weight than it should have. The DNA did not belong to Marcus Hale. It belonged to someone else. Someone whose name was already in the system. Someone who had never been questioned. When the file was reopened and the full record pulled, investigators noticed one final detail. Something buried so deep it had survived decades without scrutiny. The witness who placed Marcus at the scene had once worked with the actual DNA match. And when they opened the original evidence locker linked to that name, they found it empty. What was missing would change everything. The envelope didn't stay sealed for long. Once the lab results were reviewed, the case could no longer be contained inside internal memos and quiet phone calls. A wrongful conviction was no longer a theory. It was a threat. To reputations. To careers. To an entire department built on the promise that mistakes were rare and justice was reliable. Marcus Hale was informed in a visiting room that smelled of disinfectant and old air. A lawyer he didn't recognize sat across from him, her hands folded, her voice careful. "There's been a development," she said. Marcus had heard those words before. They usually led nowhere. Appeals denied. Motions dismissed. Hope raised, then crushed. This time felt different. She slid a document across the table. He stared at it, not fully understanding what it meant, only that it mattered. DNA. Evidence. Another name. Marcus's hands trembled. Not from excitement, but from fear. Because hope, after years inside, could be dangerous. Outside the prison walls, the review turned into an investigation. The name attached to the DNA was Evan Rowe. Rowe was a longshoreman with a history of violent altercations, a man known to drink hard and hold grudges longer than most. He'd worked briefly at the same depot as the victim years earlier. He'd been fired after a dispute that ended with threats. Threats no one had taken seriously at the time. Because they didn't have to. They had Marcus. When detectives pulled Rowe's old file, they found notes that never made it into the main case record. Anonymous tips. Reports of arguments. A brief mention of a tool similar to the one recovered at the scene. Logged, then ignored. Rowe had been questioned once. Informally. He'd provided an alibi that was never verified. The investigation had moved on, or been directed elsewhere. Detective Brewer was called back in, this time under oath. The years had not been kind to him. His confidence was thinner. His answers slower. He claimed oversight, pressure, a chaotic scene. He denied any intentional wrongdoing. But intent mattered less than consequence. And the consequences were piling up. The witness was next. They were older now, less sure. Time had softened their certainty, eroded the sharp edges of memory. Under renewed questioning, cracks appeared. Details shifted. Distances changed. Lighting conditions became uncertain. Eventually, the truth slipped out. They had been encouraged, not forced, not threatened, just nudged, shown photos until one felt familiar, told they were helping, told their memory was good. They hadn't lied exactly. They had trusted. That admission alone shook the case to its core. As the review widened, the story grew darker. Evidence logs revealed missing items, interviews that were summarized but never recorded, timelines adjusted to fit conclusions instead of the other way around. The original investigation hadn't been malicious in the way people imagined corruption to be. There were no bribes, no secret meetings in smoke-filled rooms. There was urgency. There was fear. There was the need to close a case before the city turned its anger inward. And Marcus Hale had been convenient. Inside prison, rumors spread faster than facts. Marcus heard whispers before confirmations. Guards treated him differently. Some avoided his eyes. Others watched him with something like curiosity. "Looks like you might be getting out," one said casually, as if discussing weather. Marcus nodded, said nothing. Freedom was starting to feel unreal. At night, he lay awake imagining it. Walking outside without counting steps. Making choices that weren't dictated by bells and bars. Seeing the sky without razor wire cutting it into pieces. But another fear followed closely behind. What if it collapsed again? What if this was another almost? The prosecution pushed back hard. They argued that DNA alone didn't erase the original conviction. That evidence could be transferred. That memories faded. That reopening old cases risked undermining public trust. Behind closed doors, different conversations were happening. Because if Marcus was innocent, the system hadn't just failed. It had refused to look. And that refusal had a body count measured in years stolen. Then Evan Rowe disappeared. He didn't show up for work. His apartment was empty. His phone disconnected. No forwarding address. No goodbye. It looked bad. Too bad. Investigators scrambled, worried they'd lost the one person who could definitively answer everything. A warrant was issued. Alert sent out. His face circulated quietly among agencies. Marcus's legal team moved faster. They filed an emergency motion citing new evidence, witness recantation, procedural failures, and now, the disappearance of an alternative suspect. The hearing was scheduled. For the first time in decades, Marcus was escorted into a courtroom without shackles. The room felt smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he had grown larger, stretched by years of confinement. He listened as lawyers spoke about his life like it was a file number. He watched the judge's face for signs he couldn't read anymore. When the DNA results were presented, the room shifted. When the witness admitted uncertainty, it shifted again. When the missing evidence logs were displayed, neatly highlighted, something broke. The judge ordered a full evidentiary hearing. Marcus was returned to prison to wait. Again. 2 weeks later, Evan Rowe was found. Not dead. Hiding. He'd been staying with a relative in another state, claiming he panicked when police started asking questions. He said he didn't know anything about DNA, about the tool, about the murder. But panic has patterns. And his story unraveled quickly. Under questioning, Rowe admitted to being near the depot that night. He admitted to arguing with the victim. He admitted to carrying a metal tool for work. What he didn't admit, yet, was everything else. But they didn't need it. Because another piece finally surfaced. A tape. Buried in storage. Misfiled. Forgotten. An audio recording from the original investigation that captured a brief exchange. An off-the-record moment left running by mistake. It wasn't a confession. It was worse. It was Detective Brewer acknowledging, quietly, that Marcus didn't feel right for the crime, but that the case had already gone too far to turn back. The courtroom was silent when it played, and Marcus understood, in that moment, that innocence was never enough. Timing was everything. As the judge recessed, the truth hovered just out of reach, fragile and exposed. Because even now, with evidence mounting and narratives collapsing, there was one final question no one had answered. If Marcus Hale didn't kill that man, why had the system chosen him to carry the blame? The answer would surface, and it would be harder to accept than guilt ever was. The courtroom was packed when the final hearing began, not with spectators hungry for spectacle, but with people who understood what was at stake. Journalists, law students, retired officers who recognized the look on the judge's face, the look that said something irreversible was about to happen. Marcus Hale sat at the defense table, older than his years, hands folded the way prison had taught him. He had imagined this room 1,000 times, but imagination hadn't prepared him for the weight of it. Every sound felt amplified. Every glance felt loaded. The prosecution no longer spoke with certainty. They spoke with caution. They argued procedure, technicalities, precedent. They insisted the original jury had acted in good faith, that overturning a conviction decades later could not undo the damage without creating new chaos. But the defense told a different story. They told the story of shortcuts taken under pressure, of evidence quietly shelved, of a witness guided instead of questioned, of a suspect dismissed, because pursuing him would have complicated an already clean narrative. They told the story of a system that mistook closure for truth. And then they played the tape again. The audio filled the room, thin and distorted, but unmistakable. Detective Brewer's voice, tired and resigned, acknowledging doubts he never documented, admitting, without realizing it, that certainty had been manufactured. When the recording ended, no one spoke. The judge leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and exhaled. The ruling came slowly, deliberately, as if each word needed to be placed carefully to avoid breaking something fragile. The conviction was vacated. The sentence was overturned. Marcus Hale was ordered released pending dismissal. For a moment, nothing happened. Marcus didn't move. He had learned that sudden movements could be dangerous, that hope, when mishandled, could collapse. Then his attorney touched his arm. "It's over," she whispered. The room blurred. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Microphones clustered like insects. Questions flew before Marcus could process what freedom felt like. He stood there, blinking in the daylight, unsure where to look or how to stand without someone telling him where to go. He was 56 years old. He had entered prison at 31. The world had remade itself without him. Phones were thinner, streets louder. People walked faster, eyes glued to glowing screens. Everything felt sharp, overstimulating, unreal. Marcus gave a short statement. He thanked his legal team. He said he felt relief. He said he hoped his case would lead to change. What he didn't say was how afraid he felt. Because freedom didn't erase prison. It followed him. The case against Evan Rowe moved quickly. Faced with the reopened evidence, the witnesses' revised testimony, and the recorded doubts from the original investigation, Rowe's defenses crumbled. He accepted a plea deal that acknowledged responsibility without reopening every wound the trial would tear open. He admitted to the argument, to the confrontation, to striking the victim in a moment of rage he'd spent years pretending never happened. Justice arrived late, but it arrived unevenly. Rowe would serve time measured in years. Marcus had already served decades. The fallout was immediate. An internal investigation reviewed dozens of closed cases tied to the same unit. Some convictions held, others didn't. Files were reopened. Families were notified. Silence was broken. Detective Brewer retired quietly before disciplinary action concluded. No charges were filed. The department issued a statement acknowledging procedural failures, without naming intent. No one went to prison for what happened to Marcus. No one could give him back his life. Freedom proved harder than innocence. Marcus struggled with choices. Grocery stores overwhelmed him. He avoided crowds, slept lightly, listened for doors that no longer slammed shut behind him. He attended counseling, learned words for things he'd lived with silently. Trauma, hypervigilance, institutionalization. People congratulated him. They called him lucky. He nodded, smiled, thanked them. But luck hadn't put him in a cell for 25 years. Luck had simply let him out alive. Months later, Marcus visited the old depot site. The tracks were gone, the weeds replaced by polished concrete. A cafe stood where the body had been found. Music played softly inside. People laughed, unaware of what the ground beneath them had once held. Marcus stood across the street, hands in his pockets, watching strangers move freely through a space that had defined his existence. He didn't cross. Some ghosts didn't need revisiting. The story spread beyond his city. International headlines picked it up. Wrongful conviction, DNA evidence, systemic failure. Marcus's face became a symbol, proof that the system could be wrong, and that time did not heal injustice. Letters arrived from other inmates, some hopeful, some desperate, some already resigned. Marcus read every one. He responded when he could, because he understood now that his case wasn't rare. It was just visible. Years later, when asked what haunted him most, Marcus didn't talk about the violence, or the fear, or the nights spent listening to other men break in the dark. He talked about certainty, about how everyone had been so sure. The witness, the detectives, the jury, the system. Certainty had closed the door on doubt, and doubt was the only thing that could have saved him. On the anniversary of his release, Marcus returned to the courthouse, not for a hearing, but for a lecture. He spoke to law students about evidence, bias, and the cost of mistakes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He told them what it felt like to age inside walls built on confidence instead of truth. He told them justice was not a verdict. It was a process, one that demanded humility. The camera lights dimmed as the room emptied. Marcus stood alone for a moment, listening to the echo of footsteps fade. He had his life back, but it would always be divided into before and after. Before the sirens faded, after the truth finally spoke. And somewhere in filing cabinets and evidence rooms across the world, other stories waited, quiet, mislabeled, and dangerous in their silence, because they thought the truth was buried. But as Marcus Hale proved, it only waits. And if this story stayed with you, if it unsettled something you thought you understood, you already know what to do. Subscribe, because the next case might be closer than you think.